Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. A few updates back. Black Ops 6 introduced a brand new movement update via a new perk that actually completely gets rid of tactical sprint in-game, a feature that we've obviously had in Call of Duty for several years now. And the more that it's been tested, the more that I've personally played with it, and it seems like the general community has played with it, it seems like it's something that, at least with the Black Ops 6 movement system and omnimovement, which is presumably the movement of the future according to how the devs have described it up until this point, it really, I feel like, sort of heightens the gameplay, the flow, the feel in the omnimovement system, as opposed to what tac sprint does to the system, right? And so wanted to talk about this a bit today because we actually have stats to prove that this is incredibly beneficial. And looking at Warzone in specific, which is currently lacking this perk, I think there's a really strong conversation to be had for why this should exist, at least as an option, if not as a default layout and movement system. So in multiplayer, for instance, right now, if you were to go into your class setup here, personally, I use Slipstream, the new perk, as my perk greed option. And what it does, as you can see with the description here, is raises your base sprint speed at the cost of removing tac sprint. So your general sprint speed is now faster in game. However, there is no tac sprint whatsoever. You don't get the increased gun raise in the fastest possible sprinting speed, but your base general sprint is much faster. And when you go through and you play with this, you notice that difference right away. You no longer have the tac sprint animation, you no longer have that ultimate fast movement, but the flow of the gameplay, the flow of gunfights and general movement, when you're stringing slides into it, when you're stringing jump shots, and everything that omni movement presents, feels a lot more natural and feels a lot more smooth. Unfortunately, though, with Slipstream here, obviously I have it equipped in multiplayer. If we were to back out of these 42 different menus and go into the Warzone side of things, if I open up my weapons menu in Warzone and I go through the perks, perk 1, I'm Master Prestige and some of my stuff is still bugs, like Scavenger, haven't been able to equip it ever, but there's obviously no Slipstream in perk 1. It's a red perk though, so maybe in perk 2, nope, not available here either. We do have Sprinter, which gives us infinite tac sprint, which is a thing, right? You can utilize that if you want. Then in perk 3, again, nothing with Slipstream. So it is a multiplayer only perk. It is a multiplayer only system. Obviously, Black Ops 6 being the definitive home of omni movement and then it being integrated into Warzone, obviously they probably want to test this in that system first. But it being introduced as a perk absolutely screams, yes, Slipstream is a full-on test. And the advantage is here that you may not realize because you read that as, oh, there's no more tac sprint. That's a movement nerf, right? Not necessarily, because you have situations like in the close range where you have sprint to fire speeds and tac sprint to fire speeds. And for whatever reason, the Warzone menu in general doesn't like to detail some of these stats, but ADS exists, sprint to fire exists. Both of those also have tac sprint stats as well. You know, tac sprint to fire speeds are in the game and tac ADS speeds are in the game. And when you eliminate tac sprint, you also eliminate those cons. It takes longer to go from being in tac sprint into an ADS or into firing your weapon than it does out of just a normal sprint or a base walk. So you then, in the close range, if you're using, an SMG or a shotty or whatever the case is, you no longer have that disadvantage of that increased time to get your sights up, to get a gun firing. And that actually plays a pretty big role in that. Plus, Exclusive Ace actually did some fantastic testing, which shows that while yes, you get rid of tac sprint, you lose that ultimate fastest mobility option, there are actually a lot more similarities to general movement speeds than you might realize. And by the way, as we are breaking down the stats and the details here, making the case for this potentially being a thing, if this is a conversation you want to shed more light on, you want to bring more attention to, dropping a like on the video is a fantastic way to do so. Obviously, the more we talk about this as a potential option for Warzone gameplay, the more eyes that are on it, the better the chance that Raven does see it and it's like, okay, maybe we'll experiment around with this either via an LTM or adding this in as a perk or whatever the case is. So seriously, I do mean it. A like rating does always really help the channel grow and share the topics around. And of course, if you're new to the channel, you want to guarantee you're always in the know for everything going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications as well. But here we've got this video from Exclusive Ace from a few days back saying, should Slipstream be the default movement? Actually talking about making this the full default thing in Black Ops 6 or in Call of Duty. beauty. And I'll leave a link to this full video down in the description below. He does some fantastic examples and breakdowns here, but I did want to highlight this stat graph here with these slipstream movement speeds that Ace actually went through and tested what these slipstream speeds were like going from certain distances, 10 meters to 25, all the way out to 80, like when you're full on rotating, for example, in Warzone, versus the base movement speed where you're tack sprinting as much as you can, but obviously there is that break in between it, versus tack sprinting with double time, which extends that tack sprint timeout. And you can see there are some very interesting numbers here. Clearly, in the close range, yes, tack sprinting, even with double time active, it's not going to make a difference because it doesn't break in time, is going to be faster than normal slipstream sprinting. However, in these close range fights, when you're in 10 meters, let's say, you're going to be navigating buildings, you're going to be navigating rooms. That's where you're fighting close range. While yes, you're going to be faster moving and sprinting with something like tack sprint enabled and with double time enabled and whatnot, you're then going to have to get into the fight with your ADS and with your sprintifier. And if you're caught out in the middle of a tack sprint while doing so, that's going to slow those stats down a decent margin. Whereas with Slipstream, it's just like the base sprint speeds, and it's a lot faster to get into your ADS and to get into your firing and whatnot, right? And then you get to 25 meters. Again, there is a bit of a gap here. Double time and base tack sprints are a little bit faster than using Slipstream. It's not much. It's literally 0.28 seconds there, but it's something. It's somewhat noticeable. But then you get into some of these longer distances, and it's not nearly as much of a gap as you might think. You know, when you're running for 50 meters, when you have the fastest possible movement speed going with tack sprinting as much as possible with double time, it takes 6.23 seconds to go 50 meters with that active, versus just Slipstream takes 6.78 seconds. So about half a second longer. It's not much though. And still, you get the advantages of not having those tack sprint delays, which can be tricky. You might be running a 50-meter distance, right? But what if someone jumps around a corner when you're in the middle of that tack sprint and then you're fighting face to face? You're in that tack sprint animation, suddenly you have that slower ADS, that slower sprint to fire, stuff like that. And then even over 80 meters, it's not a super significant difference. Yes, it's fastest to have double time equipped and to have tack sprint there going as fast as possible, 10 seconds to go 80 meters, just over 10.5 seconds without double time and having that tack sprint reset a little bit more frequently, but only 10.82 seconds with just Slipstream. So removing tack sprint from the game, yes, you are a little bit slower, especially over those longer distances. Are you necessarily, though, sprinting 80 meters untouched, never doing anything like slide canceling, moving into a building, checking some loot, going behind cover, stopping to ADS and pre-aim a sightline, whatever the situation calls for? There's always going to be those slight interruptions. You're never just infinitely sprinting, right? So even then, I feel like the advantage lies with Slipstream because of what it offers for close range gameplay and the general flow of movement and the transition of movement from sprinting into ADS, into sliding, into diving, whatever the case is. It's not nearly as clunky as with double time. So Warzone not having this, I feel like is kind of an L, even just as an option. It doesn't necessarily need to be the default like Ace is trying to, you know, push for with this discussion necessarily, but as an option. You know, we have Sprinter as a perk here. Why not maybe either replace that or add something similar to that with Slipstream to give players the option to see how it works? I mentioned earlier, this being added as just a perk in Black Ops 6, I feel like sort of presents it as, hey, we're going to monitor the data behind this, see how players are performing with Slipstream, what their movement is like. We know they're tracking everything from the data that came out, right? And so they'll be able to see, yes, they have Slipstream active and they're performing like this. They have better kills, or their movement seems like it's more fine-tuned because they're doing better in games, whatever the case is. They notice that, and then suddenly it's like, okay, well, the data presents a situation where Slipstream is providing ample advantages for players in smoothing out gameplay at the same time. This is a movement update that could absolutely significantly change gameplay in Warzone in a way that we haven't seen in some time. Tack sprinting has been a part of it for a while now, but when you introduce something like omnimovement, there are certain clunky elements of it when they try and coexist. This is a way to navigate that and circumvent that I think could be pretty beneficial. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, but I did want to present this as like a Warzone topic as opposed to Aces here, which is more multiplayer oriented, but I think there's a good conversation for both sides, especially when there are a lot of similarities between the gameplay, even though obviously the application is going to be a bit different. Would love to get your thoughts down below though. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like on it, and if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.